computer. Hello again. So here we are with episode 2 of For Whom the Book Tolls, which we did. I think last time we did this, we hadn't yet got a title sorted out, but we came up with that one,
We
and
have now.
we
Yeah.
rather like it. Cringe-worthy as it may well be, but it's absolutely brilliant, I think. So anyway, welcome back if you're joining us for the second time. I'm Ken Powell, and my colleague here is.
Nicholas Graham.
And we're both authors, amongst other things. And we thought, well, we've been meeting together for a long time to, as old men do, put the world to rights,
Who are you
politically,
calling an old man?
and along the way to have many discussions about various types of literature, the books that we've enjoyed reading, and indeed the books we haven't enjoyed reading. And we thought it would be quite fun to share that. So this is our second one doing this, which will hopefully will have less glitches than the previous one. So our apologies for that if you had that, and we'll do our best to make it around about 30 minutes, but it might go on a little bit longer. But a hot tip for you: feel free to listen to this on 1.2 speed or 1.5 speed, as I often do when I'm listening to podcasts. It gets through much faster, and the idea psychologically is that actually you retain the information better, which would be great because we've got lots to share with you. So we're kicking off today, looking at a book that I've chosen, and then Nick's going to throw in a few books on a related subject as it happens. We won't always do that, but this time around we're sticking with Hitler, which is quite something. That's kind of suddenly we go all serious, because obviously you can't really, well, you can argue you can't really be frivolous with Hitler, but we'll come to whether that is possible to do that at a later date. But the book that I want to share is one that I've been really enjoying. It's quite literally called Hitler, a biography, and it's by Ian Kershaw. And the book was originally a 2-volume set that he has condensed into one magnum opus. It's absolutely huge. To give you a sense without actually physically seeing the book, if you were to get the audio version of it, it's over 44 hours long. So that was definitely one that I listened to on 1.2 speed, I can tell you. But it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And of course, it's impossible to talk about Hitler's life without wrapping up the whole of kind of German history during that period of time of his life, and in particular the Second World War. And you get kind of the absolute minuscule details from Kershaw's writing about the decisions, the people who were involved, the actions that took place, the things that went right and the things that went wrong, and little commentaries along the way from the author as to what he thinks were, the high points, the low points, and the reasons for why they happened. Nick, I think you were telling me just before we started recording that you've had a little look through it and everything. What did you think from Kershaw's writing?
I've had a look through the early years, up to about the beer hall putsch and his release from jail in 1925, and a couple of things and I have to say I found it absolutely compelling reading, because this was a part of Hitler's life that I think doesn't get into the 2-minute potted biography that most of us carry around. It's when his name comes up. The first thing to say is that Kershaw points out very early on that this is a condensation. It doesn't have the historiographical apparatus that you would find in a scholarly book, but he writes with real narrative verve and thrust. He moves things on at a rate of knots. This may be 900 pages, but you're never ever going to feel that it's lagging or you're being left behind and wondering what's happening next. And the interesting thing from my point of view, because I'll talk a bit about fictional representations of Hitler in due course, is that this provided in the early years a really fascinating historical context for the seeds from which monstrosity develops, which I found an absolute. Kershaw tells an absolutely compelling tale.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. It's just it's weird to say when you've got a really in-depth uh, book of history, really, which is what it is. And to call it, compelling and absolutely riveting is a strange kind of thing to say. The only time I've had something like that is with Peter Frankopan's Silk Road history, which was for me was a page turner, and at the ending of every chapter was a brilliant kind of cliffhanger that he would give there. You just had to go on to the next chapter. And while Kershaw is a different kind of writer to Peter Frankopan, it's the same kind of level of gripping. Of you just want to get to the next part of the story, as it were, and keep going with this. There's no sense of, oh lordy, I've got another 400 pages of this to go, and it's mind-bogglingly boring. Not for a second. Every page is brilliantly written. I'm not without my criticisms of Kershaw's writing. Having said that, uh, one of the issues that I found with him as I went along is I felt he tried too hard to make sure it didn't sound like he was praising Hitler. It felt like every now and again he kind of stops and he kind of just kind of like pulls back on the commentary and sort of says, well, of course, this wasn't anything to do with Hitler's brilliance. This wasn't anything to do with any great planning. This was pure luck again and again and again and again. And whilst that is true to a certain extent, I think he ends up kind of just pushing down the fact that Hitler, for all the terrible, terrible things that you can say about him, and obviously that's huge. There was something of a brilliance about him in the context of where he was at the time, with the economics of the time, with the history of the time. That's not to say that he would, could appear in a different timeline and rise again. I think he wouldn't. There's many a science fiction story or whatever, and in fact, you're going to talk about one later on, of him appearing in a different situation. Personally, I think that if that happened, he would just get nowhere. He'd be an absolute failure.
It,
But he was in the right place at the right time for his particular skill set, I think. And I think sometimes Kershaw is just too eager to try and sort of say, oh, it's just pure luck, just pure nonsense.
well,
And
yeah, it struck me that Kershaw is actually very good on the cock-up theory of history and
yes,
how history is sometimes a nightmare from which people simply cannot wake up, and the wrong thing happens at the wrong time to the wrong people. And that he's very clear that there were many other ways that the history of Germany between the wars could develop,
mm,
were it not for an extraordinary and unlikely set of circumstances. The thing that really interested me about the Kershaw's approach to this, where he makes it absolutely clear that he is not in any sense rationalizing the development of a monster who brought untold suffering, carnage to Europe and the world. But from the point of view of Kershaw, the historian, or Kershaw, the writer, there is um, a I think a well-known thought, certainly among biographers, that most biographers start out by loving their subject and end up absolutely hating him or her. And apart from the fact that Hitler gives Kershaw the opportunity to cut to the chase here, and
hate from the
I
beginning.
wonder, you clearly cannot start with an undertaking like writing a biography with any degree of empathy
No.
whatsoever, but you have to have understanding and be able to pair and tease out the psychological realities and factors with the forces of history. And I'm in awe of what he has done in the parts of the book that I've read,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
I don't know how he maintains the
yeah.
distance.
Well, he does. As far as I'm concerned, he keeps it all the way through there. My crit, I suppose, is that just every now and again he feels like I feel what you're saying though is that is he does that in his writing. It's clear. There's plenty of mentions of cock ups and luck. Excuse me, kind of cough. And issues like that. But every now and again, he seems to take a step back and kind of do a little summary and says that this is nothing special about Hitler. There was nothing good about him. and it just felt unnecessary, as if he was just trying to, when there are successes for Germany, especially in the early part of the war, it feels like he's kind of at pains to sort of say, "In no way am I praising this whatsoever." And that's just my feeling from that.
Yeah,
What did you get? Sorry, go on.
sorry, go on. No,
Well, I was just going to ask, what did you get of Hitler as a boy?
um, it the, this was really interesting. I mean, the um, the fractured family background, the death of the mother, the authoritarian father. It's a very fertile ground for bringing psychological and psychiatric interpretations uh, uh, to him. The thing that struck me about the the youthful Hitler, as soon as he'd left the family ambience and gone to Vienna, is one, he fancied himself as a bit of a dandy and a connoisseur of art and architecture, and two, was clearly felt that the world owed him a living and that he wasn't going to do anything as disgusting or disgraceful as turning his hand to an honest day's work at any point if he could possibly avoid it. Um, and yeah, you could teenagers go through that sort of phase quite often. So I'd be hugely reluctant to draw any long-term uh, conclusions from this. But the 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 narcissism and the self-aggrandizement that Kershaw teases out seem to me to be an absolutely fertile ground for understanding how this completely aberrant psychology develops.
Yeah, I agree, and at least I agree with much of that. My feeling when I was reading the story was that I don't understand why people aren't doing more of a diagnosis of him for autism, because that's
Mm.
very much what I saw. I mean, for all the traumas of what his father was like, and so on and so forth, there was something about the boy already that was a bit more aloof. Didn't seem to have much natural empathy towards other people, but wasn't necessarily down a kind of a sociopathic link. Although many a sociopath is, in the proper sense of the word, and by that I don't mean disparagingly. Many a very good businessmen or women are sociopathic, because that ability to be steeled against nature and against the things that have got to be done, the hard decisions that have got to be made. It's quite difficult for most of us, but that ability to just do it because it needs to be done, that makes somebody who's very good in business. And it's that kind of lacking of empathy, the kind of like, well, something's got to be done, it's got to be done regardless of whether people like it or
Mm-hmm.
not.
Yeah.
So sociopathic in that sense, it was very much in there. And this also kind of like when he's a teenager, and this whole idea of basically being told, you're not good enough at art. Architecture is where you need to go. And when he eventually comes to terms with this, he decides he's going to be a great, great architect, and does absolutely nothing whatsoever to make this actually happen.
Yeah.
So basically hangs around, and I don't think it's a laziness or anything like which it can be put down to. I've seen this kind of idealistic, visionary thinking that has no basis in reality from a lot of people who are on the neurodivergent line. And I have ADHD myself, and as a teenager I was very similar. I was planning out what I was going to be in life and how I was going to get there, and then didn't necessarily do an awful lot towards it. I did something towards it, but there were way more plans of what I was going to be, including being a train driver, which I was still hankering that one day I'm going to actually kind of go and qualify and become a train driver. I just want to kind of drive around my own giant Hornby set, if and I've had that since I was 6, and done absolutely nothing to get there. So that this is that kind of big vision, but then inability to do anything about it, is quite a typical neurodivergent way of doing things. And here is Hitler doing exactly that, and having loving politics and almost being self-taught in terms of the kind of the books that he was reading to kind of know things, because he was coming from quite a kind of quite a low class kind of background, and he was trying to hobnob with those who are above his station, as it were, and seeing himself as being perfectly capable of doing that,
Mm.
and gradually building up this kind of these skills. In fact, you could argue that he would have just carried on being a complete waster and have gone nowhere had it not been discovered during one of the early political meetings that he was absolutely brilliant at speaking in terms of rousing people up. Again, in a way that you probably couldn't do now, or at least you wouldn't do it like he did it now. You would just probably sound like a maniac. But the way he spoke was right at the time, and he was picked up by somebody else who was like, right, this kid is good. He's really good. We need to get him, on the speaking front. And from there on in, everything snowballs to build this unrealistic vision of himself. By the end of it, he literally thinks he's a prophet. He really does. So the things that he said that were just rhetoric in the beginning, by the end of it, he's absolutely convinced these were his prophecies coming true. And of course, he like all great prophets, he completely skewers the actual facts to make it fit what the prophecy
It's the
said.
fitting in thing that struck me as being interesting. Kershaw is absolutely clear that the reading and the the the, the self-taught autodidact aspect of this is entirely shot through with confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Who's looking for sources that will confirm his prejudices and his own view. None of it is he never seems to have absorbed an idea that challenged his worldview.
No.
Everything was simply fitted in.
And indeed,
In
throughout his leadership, he refused
that
anything that would go against would go against his view, wouldn't he? At any point, and people would be sacked for
yeah.
suggesting,
So,
alternative strategies.
throughout it is utterly narrow, utterly
Yeah,
authoritarian, utterly unable to accommodate new or different thinking or ideas, which is
yeah.
obviously part and parcel of the whole business of becoming the leader who is unquestioningly obeyed.
Yes, indeed. But again, that tunnel vision aspect is very neurodiverse. To be
Mm.
absolutely fixed rigidly on a particular kind of viewpoint, and pursue that. Or not that his ideologies was absolutely fixed. I mean, I've got Mein Kampf ready to read next, which I may well do, having had it on my shelves for literally about 30 years, and always kind of intended to read it, and then kind of go, well, no, it's way too big. I'll do it another time. Now I feel, no, I want to actually just get more of his words. But that's an early ideology. And it does change and it does alter over time, but it does so through as you say, this kind of confirmation bias. As more and more people saying, yeah, what you're saying is right and good, and they build, and things that build which are in line with his ideology go in that direction. What I found very interesting was that the whole aspect of the Holocaust uh, wasn't accidental, but it was that the whole issue of Jewry was there, and I'll come back to this in a minute, because the kind of bias that people had in general was there, but it wasn't a focus for Hitler. It was the bloody Russians. It was the
He was
yeah,
really against Bolshevism,
absolutely
which
that
he
was the focus.
identified with Jewishness, I guess,
Well,
is
he did, but ultimately that ideology, that belief that that the Jews were behind it all, kind of thing.
mm,
That's what it became this conspiracy theory. Whatever, I mean, in the end, it was like any battle that goes wrong, it's the Jews that they're still in there, they're still causing all this damage. And of course, we're not any different now with so many people talking about cabals everywhere that secretly running everything, and all
it,
this kind of nonsense that you get. That seems to be a lingering idea, but Hitler was absolutely crazy about it towards the end. But really, he was pushing towards the east and to Russia. He wanted that land. He wanted the end of the Bolsheviks, and he wanted the Stalinists all out and all this stuff, and they wanted the land for Germany. And along the way, the Jews became second-rate citizens and third-rate citizens, and then eventually becoming, the epitome of all evil, and they had to be dealt with, and that's where we get the dreadful, final solution,
yeah,
and so on and so
yeah.
forth that took place.
Which I think should be it in itself, and that gradualism should warn us against any um, too ready adoption of the conspiracy theory of history.
Indeed.
And I think Kershaw is absolutely right in this respect, and is, as I said earlier, very much interested in pursuing the cock-up theory of history in respect of,
Yeah.
which I hasten to add is not to in any way exculpate from moral blame and responsibility. And I think he
No.
makes that absolutely clear as well.
Yeah, well, that brings me to another point actually that I felt very strongly about this, and this is going to sound really controversial, so I'm going to be very careful kind of how I'm saying this, so the wrong meaning it doesn't come across. Is I really don't feel that Hitler was evil. I feel Hitler was a bad person without a shadow of a doubt, and made very morally wrong decisions. But he was a product of his time. There's no way Hitler could have been Hitler without that immense backing. You know, he joined a political movement that was ideologically inclined in the directions that Nazi Germany went. But that movement was already there. He joined and eventually took over the various kind of like political groups of the day. There was always that deep loathing and suspicion of Jewry that was there, and it was throughout all the countries, and England had it, and France had it, and Russia had it, and there were lots of lots of Europe that were did not like the Jews or did not trust the Jews at all, and of course Bolsheviks as well. That was that
Yeah, I
for
mean,
the West,
Ken,
all that kind of way.
right. Let me jump in here. I do not dispute the widespread and um, you, you know deep degree of anti-Semitism in European culture and society and history, which is not uniquely German. It's not uniquely, um, and it's pervasive and has been for centuries. I don't think that in any way leads us to conclude that Hitler was not evil and that the he um, reshaped was not evil in that respect as well. And I think, yeah,
I think
everybody
I
who
think it was an evil
participated in that
ideology.
had a
Well,
degree of
but that's the
personal
point. Yeah,
responsibility.
yeah. You see, but that's the point. The ideology was evil. The ideology was absolutely foul, but it was there and it was pervasive. And as I say, like the whole the final solution wasn't coming from Hitler. He was very happy for that to come. Well, gradually, very
Well,
happy
I
for that
think
to
it
come
no,
along.
I think it wasn't
Well,
clearly
you have
Hitler's
to finish off
instinct.
reading
Yeah,
Kershaw's book on it
yeah,
because it's quite
yeah.
clear that
Okay.
actually numerous solutions were found along the way for to deal with the Jewish problem. One of which was to actually give them a state of their own,
Mm-hmm.
and just get them out of Europe. That was his key thing, just to banish them. Kind of that would have been the original thinking, and only gradually over time did it come to the point where it's like, well, no, actually, what's ending up happening is that we're ending up keeping them in these concentration camps, and that is costly, and is a horrible job, and we need to do something about this more permanently, and it
Mm.
became more murderous and intense. Now, yeah, absolutely no shadow of a doubt that that was evil ideology, and the whole aspect of Nazism as it grew in that kind of direction, without shadow of doubt. But was Hitler evil himself per se? I think less so. I think he was a bad man without a shadow of a doubt. But there, but I mean, I go back to Milgram's experiments, the famous psychologist who did the electric chair experiments, where you'd have people kind of asking questions of somebody in an electric chair, and every time they get it wrong, they were given a mild electric shock, and they were just being told by the scientists, the men in white coats, to turn up the dial and turn up the electric shocks. And it's although revisionists wonder to what extent it was Milgram's experiments valid and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, it's in all the textbooks, and it's still largely saying that what was found was fairly horrific. That actually, if somebody in authority keeps telling you to do something, you end up doing it. Now, that's not condoning the actions of anybody, and certainly not letting Hitler off the hook by any stretch of the imagination. But I think, in a sense, to refer to him as evil actually puts him up on a high level that he shouldn't be at. It's interesting that Kershaw
Right.
never refers to him as evil. He prefers to say, he was a bit of an idiot who happened to be in the right place. He was full of fancy ideas, got nowhere, was just a maniac. One of the things that he does pick up on again, and again, this takes me back to the autistic aspect for it, is that Hitler was lived permanently stressfully. When it's just, you almost get this physical description as it goes along, as he just becomes this shell of a man who's with a shaky hand and all the rest of it, as the pressure and the stress of it all is crucifying him. And there comes a point when if you beat a dog enough, it will turn around and bite. And there's that kind of aspect of him just becoming so crazed with all this, because he's out of his depth. He's absolutely out of his depth. He was, in a sense, he was the worst possible leader. He was a great speaker, but a worst possible leader when he was given that absolute power, that it becomes the Führer, and there is nobody else. He's in control of
Yeah.
absolutely everything, and that takes a physical toll on him. And he's now as much a part of the machine as the machine is part of him. The whole thing is evil. Hitler himself is not, because that puts him on this kind of, you know, demi-demon kind of aspect. I think that puts him too far up. He was a bad man. That
Yeah.
was in the right place in the right time
Okay.
to become part of an evil
It
ideology.
is this the point at which we maybe look at some of the fictional representations in that case?
Yes. Okay. I think.
Or do,
I think. Well, I'll throw just one more thing in that
yeah.
did margin upset me, and will mean that when I write my review, I will knock him down just a little bit. Is that
Mm,
at the end, Kershaw is. I mean, he talks horrifically about how many of the people who were, up there at the top didn't get punished, which is just absolutely awful.
yeah. Yeah.
But then it goes on to sort of say, um, a lot of people sort of say the German people themselves, were taken along for the ride, and they can't really be blamed. And he's absolutely against that. He's absolute for sort of, as far as he's concerned, the German people knew exactly what they were doing, and they loved this guy,
Hmm.
and they let it all happen. I feel that's unfair. I feel I can understand, I can see something of what he's saying, but I feel that he goes too far in trying to. It sounds, reading between the lines, that he's pretty much saying the German people were as much to blame, and it's like, unfortunately, I see history not so much repeating itself, but rhyming, as Mark Twain, I think, said.
Mm,
Um, uh, Today, that it's very easy to see exactly what happened with Hitler happening here in Britain
yeah.
today. Now, most people, I would say, in this country don't want to see anybody killed, anybody hurt, or anything like that. But I would also say maybe as much as 50% of the country, are more than just worried about immigration. They are concerned about non-white people being in this country, and it's
And
what I
they're
would
still
call a,
and
a
they're
kind of
yeah.
a
And they are
closet
still
race.
perfect
You
and
know,
still may not want to see people killed, but still perfectly capable of trying to set fire to immigrants, hostels,
yeah,
and so
exactly.
on, which
And all
which
you need,
which is the
you keep that going over years and
yeah.
years and years of great success
Who
with
knows
the
where we
right kind of
might
figure. You
yeah,
unfortunately you do
yeah,
get to the point to
yeah,
say, there, but for the grace of God, are currently are us
yeah,
not going, but we
yeah.
could very, very easily. And so I feel Kershaw's a little unfair with that. But enough of him.
Uh,
Right, tell me about the books that you've read and the
Well,
fiction.
I went and looked at some fictional representations of Hitler, and first thing to say is there aren't actually very many of them. But of the two, which you say historical fiction and, if you like, counterfactual fiction, there are many more counterfactual representations of Hitler than there are historical fictions. I'm going to talk a little about one of each of those because I think they're doing quite different things. And the whole business of fiction being grounded in a representation of an individual consciousness and its social and family context, and what that tells us about manners, morals, and ideas and issues are both, really highlighted in these. Um, Before I go on to that, just a very quick mention to the great Gunter Grass, the German Nobel laureate, who incidentally shared your skepticism and Kerschel's skepticism about the denazification of post-war Germany. His Danzig trilogy. Hitler is a fleeting background presence in those novels, particularly in the last one, Dog Years, which features a German family in Danzig, modern Gdansk, who breed Alsatians, and one of their puppies is presented as a gift to Hitler, who it proceeds to become his favorite pet dog. And much of the collapse of Germany at the end of the war is seen through the eyes of the activities and wanderings of this dog. It's a brilliant but deeply moral comic masterpiece. Which is just worth noting. Let me move on to two other things. Beryl Bainbridge's Young Adolf, published in 1978. Bainbridge, one of the great titans of late 20th century British fiction, Whitbread Best Novel Prizes, nominated and shortlisted for the Booker, I think, 5 times. Young Adolf is a historical fiction which purports the story of what happened when young Adolf visited his stepbrother and his family in Liverpool just before the First World War. An historical interlude that Kershaw and I think a lot of historians tend to elide as not being reliable, though it's based upon a memoir by Hitler's sister-in-law, Bridget. So young Adolf turns up in Liverpool in 1912. What do we get? We get the full on self-loathing, narcissism, narcissism's ugly twin sister paranoia and self-aggrandizement in I think he's about 23 at the time of the period of the novel, and he blunders through family life and pre First World War Liverpool in an absolutely in a quite a comic but also deeply disturbing way. Curiously, he consistently fails to interpret or understand the behaviors of the people around him and what they tell him and their words, which I guess would provide some evidence for the notion that Bainbridge is maybe with you on that diagnosis. I don't know, but in practical terms, he variously encounters a group of incompetent revolutionaries, a gang of thieves who are fencing stolen luxury goods, and is pursued by what he thinks is Austrian military intelligence, trying to arrest him for fleeing the Austrian draft and dodging military service, all of which he completely and utterly misinterprets and misunderstands. Bainbridge pulls off, I think, 2 really quite brilliant coups in the course of doing this. One is he discovers quite accidentally that there's something he's good at, which is mesmerizing people by declaiming gobbledygook when he gets up and makes a speech at a rather drunken family Christmas dinner, and his family and relatives are absolutely astonished by this. The other genuinely extraordinary thing is early on in the book, Bainbridge gives him a memory of being down and out in Vienna, which is historically verified. He spent some time in a working men's hostel and in a doss house in Vienna when
That was during his period of time when he was going to become a great
penniless.
architect.
Yeah,
and failed to.
Absolutely. And Bainbridge does something quite brilliant. And I'll just read a couple of sentences from the way she does this. She gives him a memory of being processed through the induction into the workhouse in Vienna. And they take his name and his date of birth and his details. And he says, This puny dossier was no sooner completed than it was stamped with a row of figures that effectively obliterated his name and his date of birth. For some reason, he had been terrified at the sight of those impersonal digits. He longed to make a scene, to insist they brand these same numbers on his forehead or his wrist, thus drawing attention to their own lack of humanity. And that you can argue, oh, she's doing prolepsis here. She's playing fast and loose with what we can imagine of the times and being slightly anachronistic. But it seems to me that bringing together the the, the sort of self-loathing and the narcissism of the personality, and a damaged personality that sees itself as a victim, but at the same time is that the victim's reaction to this is, oh, the state bureaucracy could be improved and made to work more efficiently, is absolutely terrifying. There is no way that we can read that and have any sympathy whatsoever for the young, homeless, and workless Hitler. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of writing. I would strongly recommend Bainbridge on that. The other one I want to talk about is, if you like a counterfactual, and I'll just say a few words about this, is Look Who's Back. Um, a, a, in which published in Germany in 2011, translated into English. A a great comic, but at the same time a very disturbing novel. Hitler wakes up in Germany in 2011 with a very bad headache and no memory of anything that's happened since April 1945. He desperately attempts to make sense of the modern Germany and the world he has found himself in. He is taken up. Nobody recognizes it. Well, people recognize him, but they don't believe he's Adolf Hitler. They think he's
in
an
character.
impersonator, somebody who's very deeply in character and not willing to step outside of character. He becomes a hit internet and TV sensation as a comic turn. And things proceed to become deeply, deeply sinister because clearly the, the frivolous people in the media don't actually realize that this is real. They think, oh, he's a comedian, he's just doing this for laughs. He very definitely isn't just doing this for laughs. And the novel follows the arc of his story as he begins to assemble a compliant media and a program that he can start to push. And we find it very funny. At the same time, it's very, very disturbing because Timo Vermes it absolutely ruthlessly satirical on this, but he does something very clever because it's all written in the first person. We see things entirely through Hitler's eyes and his narrative and his account of things. And of course, we're reading not the real Hitler. We're reading Timo Vermes's portrayal of somebody called Adolf Hitler who behaves in the way that we can reasonably expect Adolf Hitler to behave in a fictional context. But we are taking it for comedy as well. And when you step back and realize that this is what Vermes is doing with the voice, you're forced into the conclusion that actually you finding that, or I as the reader finding this comic and funny, is actually no smarter about these things than the idiots in the television company and the internet audience who stuff up because they find it funny and amusing. And it was written in 2011. Before social media really became as completely pervasive as it is now, and 2 years before the AfD were formed as a political party in Germany. And you cannot help but think that actually this novel, yes, it's very funny, but it is also a terrible warning and confronting the reader with the clear message, you think you're so clever that you can see through this and that you'd be able to recognize it and spot it for what it is. No, actually, you need to look into yourself to be absolutely certain that you're able
Yes.
to diagnose this, act it comprehensively and completely. And I strongly recommend reading it. As I strongly recommend the Bainbridge
Yeah. Yeah. They both sound
novel.
very good.
They are both very, very sophisticated
Yeah.
pieces
Yeah.
of work and very, very good indeed. I'll leave you with the ending of the Bainbridge novel where young Adolf gets on the train at Lime Street that is to take him back eventually to Vienna, and somebody remarks, "What a strange young man. He'll never amount to anything."
Yeah.
Sadly, tragically, the lesson of
Was
history is that if we allow him to, he will
He will, yeah,
again.
yeah. And I think you're saying about the lookies back. It's really important that we need to be looking at ourselves all the time, especially as it's becoming more and more apparent, quite literally with the news today of yet another right-wing party taking control somewhere in Europe that we
Yeah,
seem 100 years on to have played with socialism and democracy and globalism and seem to be moving horribly away from that back to ideologies of hatred, of division, of us and them, which was the only reason why Hitler and his cronies came to power in the first place. And I say because
absolutely.
the
Yeah,
bed of people having that kind of mentality was already there. I think that the field was ripe for the picking, and I think so. Such observations and such novels are really important to make us think again and well, I'd like to hope be forewarned and make sure we don't go down that road again. Though,
absolutely.
alas, over the
Yeah,
last 10, 15 years, it's looked horribly like that's not being the way. But there is still hope. And what's most important is not to ignore it and not to just laugh somebody off as a totally unimportant, an idiot or whatever like that. And to be very careful to watch out for these certain political figures who have a horrible habit of becoming very popular and going forward when historically you go back afterwards and think how on earth did they ever get there, how on earth did Hitler ever get there? So it's like, well, let's keep an eye out for those people right now. But we'll see whether that works or not as the years go on. But anyway, before we finish off, what are you reading at the moment? What's on your
right.
bedtime table at the moment?
Current bedtime reading. A classic American novel from the 1960s, N. Scott Momerday's Housemaid of Dawn, which fits into the genre of the return, the soldier returning from war to his pre-war environment. In this case, it's a Navajo man who had
Oh,
served in the USSR and comes back to his home in the Southwest states. Um, and it's Mama Day is was a had a poet's eye and intensity, and it's about the the power of landscape and the consciousness and awareness of where you're from, what life has done to you, and how you've changed. It still uh, uh, not even halfway through it, but it is absolutely gorgeously beautiful and deeply moving. That's N. Scott Momerday's Housemaid of Dawn.
fabulous. That's brilliant. I'm a slow reader, which eventually people will realize. So much of what I was reading last month, I'm still reading now, but I have just added to it. I'm now reading Unruly by David Mitchell, which is the history of England's kings and queens. And I have to admit, I mean, apart from just the history information, which is always great, I'm reading it largely because I think David Mitchell is brilliant. I'm a confirmed Radio 4 comedy fan, and I find his humor and his cynicism really very entertaining. Plus, I've caught odd bits of his autobiography and listened to odd things that he's kind of like said more seriously. And I just think he's a nice guy, but and his various tweets that he puts out on Twitter X. He tends to say things that I find myself thinking, yeah, I like what this guy says, and I like who he is as a person as well. So it's an irreverent look of kings and queens, and it's going to be comical, but I suspect it's also going to be full of really interesting information. So I shall no doubt learn and laugh in equal measure. So I've just got started with that, and at the moment, that's exactly what I'm getting. I'm getting both of these things. That he's very funny, but he also knows his stuff. He's a bright bloke, and I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
Brilliant.
So that's it. That's us. I think we are done.
Okay.
So I'm going to say goodbye from there. So thanks a lot, Nick, for joining us
You're
here. And
very welcome, and goodbye.
yeah, cheerio. See you next time
Cheers.
around.
Indeed.